you're going to talk about the institutional barriers and the kind of challenges around that. So please welcome Steve Sarasini.
Thank you. My research interest in this area is to understand how systemic change might come about, and for that purpose I use an institutional perspective which I thought I'd try and describe today. So the perspective I prefer the most has three dimensions of institutions. The first is a regulative dimension, and that includes things like laws, policies, legislation, and other types of regulation, things that are very stringently enforced. And if you don't abide by these types of rules, then there'll be probably some kind of sanction against you. So in this picture, which is quite chaotic, there is actually a regulative institution being enforced or being enacted. Sue, could you tell us what it is, maybe? No? Philip? Anyone? It's actually driving on the right-hand side of the road. If you don't drive on the right-hand side of the road, or you drive on the wrong side of the road, usually you might get arrested, and that's because of some kind of sanction or regulative institution that's in play. It's not always enforced. People don't always abide by it, but this is this type of institution. Then there is a normative dimension to institutions, which is linked to things like roles, identities, and norms. These are sort of subjective understandings of who we are, what we do in certain situations. So an example of this is Bob, who is a bus driver. That's his identity. And his role, he provides a public service. And this is quite different to someone in a different profession who may be an automaker and wants to develop, manufacture, and sell automobiles or cars. And further still, it's different to this guy who we'll call Johnny. By the looks of it, he's in some kind of premature midlife crisis. And he derives some kind of status or identity from owning this very nice sports car, which makes him some kind of player, perhaps tells him how to behave in certain situations. The last level is the most difficult to do research on, but exists everywhere. And this is called the cultural cognitive dimension. And this is linked to things like shared understandings, rules of thumb, that we don't really question and we don't really reflect upon. So if I were to ask, say, Magda, do you have the time? You would answer,
it's a 3:15.
3:15, and I have 7 minutes left. It would be very odd in this situation if Magda said, yes, I do have the time, but in order to get it, you'll have to pay me 50 euros. That would be very weird, because we culturally understand at this level that there is a certain way to behave. And this exists within the current sort of dominant model in our transport system. We have this idea about the car, or these ideas about the car, which we don't really question that much. Perhaps these are starting to change. And some of them are listed right here. And of course mobility, which is just getting from point A to point B. But we attach other sort of cultural meanings to what it is to own a private vehicle. Why am I telling you this? The reason is because it's very difficult to change institutions. They have this sort of enduring and very persistent character of them. They don't change very often. And quite often it's argued that we've had the same socio-technical system or institutional regime within transport for over 100 years. So the question is, how do we change institutions? How do we switch from what we have today to, say, a MaaS-based system in the future? It's very easy. You just do this. In the middle there you have something called a socio-technical regime, which is basically the institutional bit that I was mentioning before. It's very, very difficult to change. But it is possible to change, as long as you have some kind of landscape developments, and these are pressures that come from everywhere basically, and say that there are problems with what we do today, and maybe there's some new trends which we can harness and use them to transform the system. And then you have this niche level where you experiment with new things, and maybe some of those are successful, and over time these forces actually pressure the existing regime, so it transforms from one thing to something new. So the question is, do we have any landscape pressures that might force us towards a more MaaS-based system? And the answer is yes, and you probably all know about them already. Some of them have already been mentioned today. So we have CO2 emissions, the climate issue, oil dependency, air and noise pollution, congestion, traffic-related injuries and deaths, underutilization of the vehicle fleet, and so on and so forth. We also have some mega trends which might force us into a new path based on disruptive innovation, urbanization, sharing economy, servitization, where people don't want to own products so much anymore, but really have access to them, electrification of the vehicle fleet, and of course digitalization. Shouldn't forget that it's called Viktoria, Swedish ICT at the end. Great, so do we have any niche level developments? We do, and Magda mentioned some before. We have lots of different startups, companies doing things like these. So based on that, we could say, great, a transition to MaaS, mobility as a service, should be very easy. Not really. There are various barriers that we have to overcome in order for this to occur. Some of these are the level of the user. For instance, do all users, or at least a critical mass of users, want to shift from vehicle ownership to non-ownership and purchasing services? Is there an adequate willingness to pay? Can we actually provide for users' needs, for instance, using MaaS? And how will users behave if they're given the opportunity to gain access to vehicles how and ever they wish to? Will they behave sustainably? Or will there be even more cars on the road because you gain access to, say, carpools and other types of vehicles? We don't know this yet. And then there are other institutional barriers that we have to overcome. We need some kind of seamless integration into everyday lifestyles, and that means lifestyles for everyone, or at least for a critical mass of people. For some people, MaaS might be very suitable. For others that say have a family and have to ferry their kids around from location to location and have lots of little trips to do, it might actually be very difficult to design MaaS systems that do this. We need to overcome numerous barriers to collaboration between the public and private sector. Some of those have been touched on, related to, for instance, subsidies, which Mats just referred to. And then we need to create this ecosystem that actually gives opportunities to different types of stakeholders that have many vested interests. They've got sort of dominant organizational models and ways of thinking and organizational cultures. For instance, automakers, what is their role in a future system that is based on mobility services? We don't know this yet. We need to shift from fragmentation towards integration. Currently we have lots of different experiments. We also have lots of different focal areas. Is it possible to integrate goods and people into mobility as a service? We don't know this yet. We also need an ecosystem approach which is efficient, so resource efficient, time efficient, cost efficient, energy efficient, and so on. But it also has to be resilient, and it also has to be dynamic. So how do we make it adaptable, and how do we allow for new technologies to be taken up by the ecosystem as they come online? We need some new types of business models. We don't yet really know how those business models will function. And we need some innovation networks. These ecosystems of different actors in a MaaS system need to work together to innovate. And of course, we need to harness the power of digital technology. This is not just an add-on that I keep forgetting. So, yeah, there are lots of institutional barriers, and maybe we've already started to break down those barriers, but that's basically it. We can do it.